Joy Castro is an award-winning author. You might be familiar with her series, the post-Katrina New Orleans literary thrillers, Hell or High Water. But she's also written a lot of other books. I've got one I'm just going to read from her bio here. She got the Nebraska Book Award for Nearer Home and How Winter Began, her memoir, The Truth Book, and the essay collection, Island of Bones, which received the International Latino Award. She's also the editor of the anthology Family Trouble, and she served as the guest judge of Craft's first Creative Nonfiction Award. Her work has appeared in the New York Times Magazine, Senses of Cinema, Salon, Plowshares, Gulf Coast, Brevity, Afro-Hispanic Review, and elsewhere. She's a former writer-in-residence at Vanderbilt University. She's the current Willa Cather Professor of English and Ethnic Studies at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And I'm really excited to tell you that she has been shortlisted for the International Thriller Writers Award. So she gets to go to New York City, and we're please welcome Joy Castro.
Thank you so much, Leslie. It's nice to be introduced by someone that you can actually count as a friend. And so Francie and Finch has been a wonderful supporter of my work for the last few years, and I'm very grateful. Thank you to our hosts here at Bennett Martin for this beautiful space. It's a really lovely room. I've never been up here before, and it's just a nice sunny space to be together in. Thank you all for coming out on this lovely day. It's a pleasure and an honor to get to share my work with you. So I'm going to start by actually just plunging in and reading you a short selection from Flight Risk, and then I will talk a little bit about how the book came to be, and then I'm happy to answer all your questions. Oh, and also, I had some spare copies of the audiobook. So I brought those with me, and if anybody here would like a copy, there's an MP3 version and a CD version. You're welcome to those, and if you don't want them, then I'd like to go ahead and donate them to Bennett Martin. So this will be a really short reading from the beginning of the novel, and the first short chapter is actually called In the Beginning. Pregnancy makes you tired, they say. It's the effort of making all those new cells, I suppose, those tiny translucent organs that consumes your energy at a bone-deep level. Every moment seems like a good time for a nap. Sofas beckon. I've seen other women's sonograms, the small twin lungs, the dark heart beating. At night, I close my eyes and see them, those hummingbird hearts. A few breaths later, I'm dreaming. Open grassland, oceans softly rocking. Nothing we can manufacture with our hands or our brains is so delicate and intricate, yet it all unfolds without our thought or will. Week 7, a beating heart. Week 9, nipples, elbows. Week 22, eyelashes. Your body doing all that, whether you want it to or not. They say exhaustion hovers just above you like a blanket, ready to drop, ready to smother all those things you thought were so important. Your career, your household chores, your circle of friends, the yoga class that seemed so crucial at the time. Everything melts away. You're an incubator, nothing but. Your body a traitor to all your old causes. Equal pay for equal work, environmental justice, safety on the streets. Very nice, but all you really crave is sleep. Endless, luxuriant bouts of afternoon sleep stretched out on the bed in a long rhombus of warm sun. You arrange your limbs for comfort. Slumber closes down over you like a drug. You dream of a baby gazing up from your arms, curls shining, eyes radiant with love. Then you wake, gasping for breath. Chapter 2, The List. The legacy from my mother is 17 things. Number 1, a small white house in the hills of West Virginia. The paint, fading even in my childhood, surely curls back now, peeling away in long crumbling strips, exposing bare wood to the elements. Home, the nest, the scene of the crime. No one lives there now except the wild things. 2, a craving for nicotine. I chew gum, fiddle with paper clips, gnaw the ends of yellow pencils. 3, a thirst for hard liquor. 4, a taste for rough men. Hers were bikers and truckers. Mine were attorneys, surgeons, sons of wealthy families, boxers, men who owned boats. All self-declared masters of their various universes. They seemed powerful, bold, magnetic. Control is sexy until it's not. Married now 2 years to John, a Darcy, a Knightley, a truly good man. I like to think I have outgrown this particular inheritance. 5, a hunger to run. 6, a taste for cheap food, hamburger helper, Kool-Aid, Oscar Mayer, uniform slices of rubbery pink bologna red rim smeared with mayonnaise, squashed between spongy white slices of bread. Tuna casserole made with cream of mushroom soup and gray canned peas, with potato chips crumbled on top. Heinz ketchup, squeezed onto Kraft macaroni and cheese and stirred with a fork until orange. Yeah, you hear that, right? In John's circle, such things aren't eaten. There are punchlines, the stuff of a gastrolarks. I cook them alone in the kitchen at night after he's fallen asleep and eat standing up at the counter, staring out over the black lake. 7, a suspicion of the state and its services, social workers, police, anyone who wants to help us. 8, silence. What you don't say can't haunt you. Plead the 5th. 9, a love of dark liquor, sweet like danger. In my childhood, it was an exotic treat, rare and expensive, a delicacy, a thing that miraculously appeared at Christmas and birthdays, or in the pockets of the men my mother saw. I'm told the taste for licorice is hereditary. You like it or you don't. 10, my long-boned, capable hands. They can change a tire, build a table, twist stuck lids off jars, break a limb. 11, a belief in ghosts. 12, a jumpy metabolism, skittish. My friends here in Chicago often ask what diet I'm on, or, more quietly, which pill I take, and where can they get some. 13, a fear of incarceration, whether by reason of insanity or crime. 15, a fear of children, their messes, their perpetual demands, their softness, the terrible fragility of their bodies. 16, a tiredness bedded down deep in my bones. Even before I was old enough to drink, I woke in the mornings exhausted, worn and bleak, thinking, another day, an old woman inside a young girl. And in my mother's eyes, that same look. 17, grief, like an ocean, like madness. So that's how the book begins. And it's the story of a woman named Isabel Morales. She's a sculptor. She's a Latina sculptor. She makes art with found objects. And she juxtaposes things that she finds in the streets of Chicago or in parks and elsewhere into these incredibly beautiful sculptures. She's happily married to a wealthy doctor from an old money Chicago family, and they have a beautiful condominium overlooking Lake Michigan. So when the novel begins, it begins with a section called Happily Ever After. She's found her storybook ending, right? But things quickly, as you can probably surmise, unravel. because what happens is she gets a call from the prison warden back in West Virginia, where her mother has died in her cell. And so it's a complicated story of inheritance, of family, and of what it means to love across difference. I would be very happy to answer all of your questions and to tell you about the genesis of the book. This is my 6th book, and talking about why I decided to write it or what some of the elements are and where they came from would be an absolute delight to me. So please feel free to ask anything that crosses your mind.
Yeah, like, why did you set it in West Virginia?
Thanks for asking. So there are a couple of reasons. One is two are really political reasons. And I'll leave aside West Virginia's current senators. But the long-term exploitation and degradation of the land and the workers in West Virginia is just an ongoing, slow environmental and humanitarian crime. And so I wanted to write about that. I wanted to write about that in the context of our era of climate catastrophe and what it means to continue to invest in fossil fuel extraction industries that hurt not only the land, but also the people who work in them. So those are sort of two political, and I think that often West Virginians are misunderstood and sometimes even parodied or made fun of by the broader culture, right? I mean, you probably would start humming the Deliverance tune right now. And so sometimes West Virginians have been mocked by people who don't know the state well. And I think that's an injustice. And then the personal reason is that I grew up there from the age of 7 until I graduated from high school. So I witnessed much of this firsthand. We lived in very, very difficult circumstances. And the friends who I have now that I knew when I was growing up in West Virginia, none of them were there. They've all gone elsewhere. And one of the things they say is that they feel a lot of grief that they would never go back. And so I wanted to write this as a kind of elegy or exploration of what it does mean to go back. Go back to a land and a people that have been brutally exploited for the profit of others. And what it could mean to try to take a helper's stance, to think of Mr. Rogers, look for the helpers. Like what would a helper do? So Isabel fled from West Virginia early in life after having undergone various forms of trauma. And so now in adulthood, with her husband pressing her to start a family, she goes back to figure out what her legacy really means and how she can move forward. That's why West Virginia had a tremendous affection for the state and the people. It's so beautiful, but it's also incredibly ugly, and the ugliness never makes it into the brochures, but it's there.
From the mining or from what?
Well, I think the long legacy of mining that has polluted the land very severely, and then exploited workers. Some workers have been able to have a good life from mining, but a lot of workers have simply been brutally, physically, and economically exploited as have their families. So, West Virginia consistently has one of the lowest ranked public school educational systems in the country. It's usually like 48 or 49. Those were the schools we grew up in. And the poverty is grinding, and it's everywhere, and it's some of the most brutal poverty that I've seen in the United States. I've seen worse poverty elsewhere, but Appalachian poverty is pretty severe, and the human cost of that is incalculable, just incalculable. So I tend to write novels that have strong social justice themes and political themes. I do a lot of sociological research and psychological research. The novel that Leslie mentioned in the intro, Hell or High Water, that's set in New Orleans after the Hurricane Katrina, it involves a lot of psychological research, and that novel focuses on sex offenders. You might know that hundreds and hundreds of registered sex offenders took the mandatory evacuation as an opportunity to melt off the grid and disguise themselves and move back into society where they could more easily prey upon victims. And so there's a newspaper reporter who gets assigned this story and doesn't want this story. And so that's the conceit of Hell or High Water. And that's true. And then the novel picks up from that. So there's a lot of research in there about crime and recidivism and sexual predation. I had nightmares when I was researching that one. Yeah, it was really, really unsettling. And for this one, and I'll come to your question. For this one, there's also, a criminal element because Isabel's mother has been writing her letters from prison. She was convicted for a pretty terrible crime, and trying to understand that crime and place it in a larger socio-political context and come to some kind of forgiveness of her mother and forgiveness of herself is one of the tasks that challenges Isabel in the book. Yes, that's your question.
Well, I just wanted to know about your research. Do you go to different places, or is it just book research, or is it personal from your
Memory. Yeah, it's a combination of all those things. I get curious, usually what hooks me and pulls me through a book project, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, is a set of questions. So I get really curious about something, and then I do whatever research it takes to answer those questions. So in some cases, it's archival research. I go to the places for sure, like spend a lot of time in New Orleans. Oh, what kind of dance clubs would my characters dance at? What kind of Cajun food would they eat? I better eat it too so I can describe it. So there's some of that on the ground research because you want all of the sensuous images in your text to ring true. So you want to know what it smells like or how the floor creaks of this old building that other people can go into too. So you want to fact check yourself. And then a lot of it is book learning. So I spend a lot of time in the library. There's a really great medical research librarian at UNL who has helped me with some of the more esoteric areas of research. I read a lot of transcripts by convicted prisoners to hear how they tell their side of the story. I'm not really interested in dismissing anyone as a monster, no matter how horrific their crime might be. I see them as a human that has been influenced, perhaps, by horrific violence themselves, and I want to understand because I don't think we can prevent further atrocities by just labeling people monsters. I think we need to understand them and what shapes them. So I read a lot of creepy transcripts. Where sociologists sit in prisons and interview convicted criminals. I read a lot of that. And a lot of history. I bring a lot of history into my books. My agent is always like, "You sound like a professor on page 37. You need to, you need to scale it back. We want a page turner, not a snooze, fest." So I have to kind of watch that because of course I love history and I love thinking about the way that our histories, both remembered and suppressed, affect what we're doing all the time, right? At the micro level and the macro level. So I'm really interested in that. So those are the different kinds of research. I'm wondering if I'm leaving anything out in terms of research.
Are there any other West Virginian authors that you especially admire that you use for just reference or reminders or getting yourself back on track?
Well, I really love DJ Lee's Pancake. He's fantastic. I think I'm getting his name wrong, but that's something close to that because I haven't read it in years now. And then the author of Black Tickets. Again, Jane Ann Phillips. Oh, she's a knockout. She's totally dynamite. Jane Ann Phillips, Black Tickets. And most recently, my favorite West Virginia author is Jordan Farmer. He's from West Virginia. He came here and got a doctorate and went back to West Virginia. He's teaching there now. And he writes these noir novels that are exquisitely written. He's got two of them. I think they're called The Pallbearer and The Poison Flood. And he really tackles issues of environmental devastation as well as the economic exploitation of blue-collar workers in West Virginia. And he's so smart and so interesting. He's also taking on issues of disability and how those intersect with discourses of masculinity. So really interesting, you know, and like a lot of brawls in his books, like lots of men fighting men. But I really love his books. They're so smart and so beautifully written. So I recommend Jordan Farmer. And this stuff, I mean, it's like just out in the last 3-4 years. So he's at the beginning of what I think will be a meteoric literary career. Yes. Go ahead.
Isabel is an artist,
Yeah.
outlier or an outsider, however you want to. I thought of Janet Estridge here in Lincoln, and I wonder if you had a model for her art in the book.
No, I sure didn't. In fact, interestingly, yeah, I love the fact that she's kind of an outlaw artist. When I was first working on the book, she wasn't a visual artist. She was a YA author. And I had her writing chapters of various YA novels. And my notion, because I really like books like, I don't know if you all know A is by Its Possession, or Margaret Atwood's The Blind Assassin, where the author makes up texts and then incorporates them, you know, like texts from another time, like those long Victorian poems in A is by Its Possession. They're so gorgeous. But, you know, it's these two researchers, and I think at the Bodleian Library in Oxford in the present day, but Byatt writes it all, and the Blind Assassin is a tour de force of that kind of. So I thought, oh, I'm going to do a tour de force and show off all my literary skills. Well, apparently they're not that strong because an editor at Scribner, who ended up not taking the book, she was like, you know, I think these YA chapters are cool and really great, and they could be that foundation for a new YA novel, but like they're telling too much. They reveal too much. You know, my notion was that Isabel would slyly cope with her situation by writing fiction about it, and we, the reader, would be able to see that. And this editor is like, you're not doing it that cleverly. Okay, thanks for the honest feedback. That's helpful. And she's like, what if you made the person a visual artist of some kind, any kind? Because that way the art itself would be mute, and that would resonate with the fact that Isabel doesn't tell people what's going on with her. And I was like, ooh, interesting. She's like, so you could give, like, in the physical objects, you could be giving these clues to the reader, and the reader would then become really engaged, thinking, well, why is there a heap of dirt at the bottom of a clawfoot bathtub? What is that about, right? Oh, okay, yeah, because that could be really question-provoking. And so then it was really fun because when I was an undergraduate, so I was at Trinity University in San Antonio, and I took all these studio art courses, and I just loved them. But, you know, it was not something I decided to pursue, but I just love having my hands on the tools. I love making things. I loved having a vision, building it, and having my classmates and my professor tear it apart and critique. Okay, fine. But I thought, you know, this could be really cool because I could envision all these art pieces for Isabel and then not even have to go to the work of building them, right? So I could just describe it. It turned out to be so fun. So I didn't have any artist in mind at all. I just really made that aspect of her character up from scratch and from my experience. Like I paint, I sculpt, you know, I've done those kinds of things. But usually I just, you know, hang them on my own walls and like when people write poems and they put them in the drawer. For for me, visual art, so I like that. So it was
Well,
kind
you
of,
should see Janet Eskridge's art, because I think.
it's pretty
Yeah.
similar.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, I'll have to check it out. Thank you. I did have a colleague back at Wabash College in Indiana, which was my first teaching job. I was there for 10 years. Really interesting. It's one of the 3 remaining all-male colleges in the United States. And it's a crazy place to teach feminist literature and feminist theory, tell you what. And I had a colleague there in the art department, a studio artist named Doug Kalich. And he did make some things that kind of resonate a little bit with what Isabel does in the book. He would do these, he would like go for long walks. He was very crunchy granola, off the grid, really cool. And so was his wife, who was a textile artist, and they had this gorgeous cabin that they had built. And he would go for these long walks in the fields of Indiana and pick up things like old pieces of farm equipment and stuff. And then he would make these like altars out of them, really gorgeous. And I actually have one. So her work, Isabel's work, the fictional work, is not precisely like that at all. But certainly knowing personally an artist who made beautiful things out of found objects probably was at work in the back of my mind. So yeah, I haven't thought about that. So thanks for asking this question, and I'll have to check out Janet Eskridge, you said?
His wife and Linda Costa at the university.
Brilliant. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Great, thank you. Okay.
And she sells it for big bucks.
Don't they all? Yeah, I mean, that's part of Isabel's interesting challenge in the book. She comes from poverty. And he's like, wow, it's amazing what people will pay for my stuff. Yeah, big bucks, costs a lot. Well, it's artists' time and their skill. A lifetime of expertise goes into every piece, vision. Okay, yes, what was your question?
Thank you. Dr. Castro, how do you choose the name of the characters in the book? What process do you go through?
Thank you for asking that. Call me Joy.
Thank you.
Yeah. I try to come up with a name that's not going to feel obtrusively symbolic, right? I don't want to jolt people out of the text to go, ooh, haha, that's funny, or that means something. I wanted to sort of flow so that if you don't stop and think about it, it just encapsulates some aspect of the person's character. But then if you do stop to think about it, you're like, ooh, that has a resonance. So for example, in the book that I just turned the revisions in on, it's a historical novel. One of the characters' names is Feliciano Galvan. So he's a Galician character working for the Cuban insurgency against colonial Spain. And so Feliciano has to do with happiness, and Galvan resonates with galvanizing people. And he is in fact a lector. You might be familiar with this. Back in the day, before cigar manufacturing was automated and it was all done by hand rolling, in most cigar factories at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th centuries, a lector, a reader, would be up on a wooden tower in the cigar factory. So there would be like 500 cigar rollers at benches. And this reader would sit up on the tower and read first the daily news from a few different newspapers, then political theory. And they were reading like Marx, Engels, Bakunin, Proudhon, so anarchists, to the cigar rollers. Can you imagine this in a factory today? I think not. And then in the afternoon, they would read novels. So they would read like Hugo's Les Miserables, or they would read a Dickens novel. They would read these novels about human struggle and compassion and courage. A lot of adventure novels like The Count of Monte Cristo, to keep the workers entertained through the afternoon, right? When most people are like, coffee is fading, I need a nap. They would read these lively stories. Anyway, so Feliciano Galvan is the stranger who comes to town, and he's galvanizing everyone with the things that he's reading. So that's just like one tiny example. So I try to, again, make the names not stick out in a way that jolts readers out of the text, but then also like upon deeper reflection, you can find a little bit more there. So in this novel, I named John because it's just such a good, solid name for a good white guy to have. You know, and Isabel, there's something beautiful about her, and Morales, like she's trying to investigate her own morals, and you know, her ethics, and is she trustworthy? Can she be trusted to have and raise a child, given her inheritance? And I'll say no more about that, but you know, so she's sort of probing her own moral choices, and there's this whole section where she's flying. It's a three-part structure. And in the first part, she's in Chicago having fancy dinner parties, living the life. And she gets that call and she decides that she's going to go back to West Virginia. In the second part, she's taking a series of flights because it actually takes you several flights to get back like, to where I live. And little dinky, you know, those puddle jumper airplanes with the propellers, and you get nervous. And so while she's on each of the flights, she reflects upon and dissects a moment from her past when she had to make a significant moral decision. And so she's kind of taking herself to task, but also sort of reckoning with who she was and what she had to face and the fallout of the decisions that she made. So that's kind of fun. So the middle section is like a movement through physical space, but also like a time tunnel back into the past, and then she lands in West Virginia with all of that processing having happened in her mind, but also having been shared with the reader, so we know more about who she is and why she's so quiet. Yes.
Two parts.
Yeah.
First, can you talk a little bit about how you collect your material and save it, and so when it comes time to pull it up with focal quote or description, you can do that. And then, what is your writing area?
Oh, I love this kind of question. I really do. I totally love it, and I love to see what other writers do in this regard too. So usually, I don't know that I'm beginning a project when I'm beginning it. It just creeps up on me and starts to accrete, you know. So I'll be like, oh, I've read this book about it, and now here's another book on the same topic, and then they start to sort of, you know, multiply. And then I clear out a place on the bookshelf for them, and you know. So I got married recently, and when my husband and I moved in together, we decided that we weren't going to have rooms of our own, right? The whole Virginia Wolf, a room of one's own thing. We just both work at the kitchen counter. So it's like he's a professor also, he's a scholar of German cinema, and which is really weird. Like you would think we would have like our own little posh studies or something like that to work in that would be all cushioned, but we don't. It's pretty fly by night, nomadic, and I kind of like that. And so I just sort of gather everything there. I have a little stack on the kitchen counter, and if it gets too chaotic, I have a drawer in the kitchen that I'll put things in so it's not messy when people come over, and then a shelf on my bookshelf dedicated to the current project. So I'm a really spatial and visual thinker, so I need to have everything like in view. And sometimes I'll just stand there like a zombie, staring at the stuff, like in this sort of trance, not knowing what it is I need. And then it'll come to me because I can see the range of everything. So that's pretty much how I do that with all of my projects. And then when I'm done, I'm done. And I disperse the books to the wind, you know, I give a lot of things away, or you know, I throw away. I write all my books by hand in these little notebooks, and then when I'm done, I destroy them. I'm not. Marco, my husband, is a total archivist. He keeps everything, and many people do, like especially for writers. They're like, oh, you should keep the. And I've been encouraged to do that, but like a couple of years ago, I had all these journals from when I was 12 years old, starting when I was 12, and I was like, you know, I feel like these are holding me back from alchemy and change and transformation. I don't want to drag around with me all these things, and I let go of all of them, so they're all gone. I know. Yep. But in a way, it was terrifying really terrifying and yet so liberating. I have to say that I find the challenge of destruction to be exhilarating. And truly, truly. And then it makes space for the new, right? I'm not carrying around a bunch of heavy barnacles of things I've done before. I can reinvent and reinvent and reinvent. And it's not even reinventing, it feels like inventing in a big blank space, like having a big fresh canvas or an empty white sheet of paper, you know? So it's scary, but I think for me, it's like burning everything and then coming from the ashes, you know, to do something new. So I love the new. I love the challenge of the new and the scary. If I'm not taking big risks, I'm not into it. I don't know if I answered the second question that you
I think you did. So you have a laptop on your kitchen counter?
had. I do. In fact, I have it in that backpack right there. Super mobile. Yeah.
Along with your notebook?
Pardon?
Along with your notebook?
Yep. And I use, I'm not too much of a fetishist about my pens as long as the ink is nice and smooth and flowy. But I do, and I'll use any notebook and write on anything, cocktail napkins. But I really love the Leuchtturm 1917 blank notebooks. It's a German company and they're so well made and the pages are pre-numbered. And then there's a table of contents in the front. So like I write all kinds of things in there. So I can go, oh, okay, on page 237, I'm starting this new story and I'll put that in the table of contents so I can find it later. So I don't have to flip through every page. So I really like those. And they have these sweet like ribbon bookmarks and they're just nice. They're pretty and they come in pretty colors. Might as well make it nice.
Can you throw those away?
When I'm done. Yeah. Yeah. Can't catch me. It's kind of like that. It's that can't catch me feeling.
Really famous, there won't be anything to go back and see your process.
No tracing. Yeah. Isn't that weird? But it works for me. Yeah.
Just throw them in the waste.
I sure do.
I'm gonna be your driver's
Thank you. That's really an honor. But you know, I mean, just like anybody, like a lot of the stuff that goes in my journal is pure dross, you know, like nobody would want to read it. It's like, whining about whatever, or like the list of stuff I have to do today at the university and this colleague who's on my nerves, or, you know, it's just super ordinary. And then it will like lurch into a passage from the piece I'm writing on. And then when I get it all written longhand, then I type the whole thing out. And also, I think I've said this at the bookstore. I'm essentially, I don't know if it's super lazy or super efficient, but when I'm typing things up from the notebook, if there's a sentence or even whole pages that I think of, then I just don't type them, right? So it's a first edit from the notebook to the Microsoft Word document file on my laptop. It's a first edit that already like scrapes away a lot of the weak stuff. So I find this to be a very efficient process. Yes,
How many times do you come to
a job. Yeah, so I was, my first job out of grad school was at that college in Indiana, Wabash College, and I had been there, well, I was there for 10 years altogether, but I guess I'd been there for 9 years when I gave a little talk at a conference in San Antonio, and one of the people in the audience happened to be a professor from here. And she was nice, and I went home. And then that November, like that happened in the summer, and then in November, she called and was like, "Have you ever thought of working in Nebraska?" And I was like, "No, never." I've never been to Nebraska. I don't know anything about Nebraska. And she's like, "Well, we're interested, so we'd like to fly you in and have you give a job talk. And you know, if you'd like to, you know, if it's a good fit, we'll see what happens." And so I was, you know, nervous. I hated going on the job market when I was a graduate student. It was so nerve-wracking. And so this was really nice to not have to like flog yourself try to convince people to hire you. This was somebody who came looking. And so that's why I came and gave this talk. And it was so crazy, y'all. So I got here, and I don't know if any of you know Barbara DeBernard, who was a professor for many years in the English department. So she and Amelia Montes, also a professor in the English, they picked me up at the airport, and they're like, "Do you have good shoes on?" And I was like, "Yeah, guess so." I was in this skirt, you know, I was like, it was a job interview, and I was on my best behavior, but I had these nice clogs with rubber soles, and they're like, "Oh, good." So they drove me out to 9 Mile Prairie in November. Like, my suitcase was still in the back of the car, and they're like leading me around 9 Mile Prairie, pointing out scat and asking if I know what kind of animal made this scat. And I'm like, dude, this is not your typical academic job situation. But anyway, after that, they took me to the embassy suites, and then I went and gave my job talk the next day. And, you know, so far it's been a lot of fun. I've been here 15 years. But that was a super unique introduction to Nebraska. Yeah. Yeah, yay for them. They were just wonderful hosts, very challenging. I thought, I'm in a different kind of place. Yeah.
So how do you deal with rejection or when you're asked to do major revisions to your favorite sections?
Those are good questions. Are you a writer?
Trying to be.
Yep. So here's what I would suggest. Learn to love rejection. Yeah. So rejection is only destructive to us as writers if we let it mean something about the quality of our work. Rejection is only painful if we hook it up to some kind of deep belief we have about our inadequacies. Right? So if we're willing, it's like if we agree with ourselves in advance to be willing to feel any feeling that rejection might trigger, like humiliation, shame, feelings of inadequacy, not being good enough. If we agree with ourselves that we're willing to feel those feelings, because if an emotion is just a sensation in your body, it might be an awful sensation in your body, but if you allow it and process it and breathe through it, it will go away. It might take 15 minutes, it might take a day, but if you say, okay, I'm gonna prepare myself to feel humiliation if my work gets rejected by the Paris Review, which it most certainly will be, right? Then you're unstoppable. You're unstoppable. If you're willing to feel any feeling and not let it make you quit, and not let it make you believe that your work doesn't have value, then you're unstoppable. And if you want to be a writer, you need to be unstoppable. Because rejection is part of the business. It absolutely is. Everyone gets rejected. Most famous, brilliant, wonderful writers that you love to read have been rejected more times than they can shake a stick at. We all have. So that's part one. Agree with yourself that you're not going to let rejection mean that there's something wrong with you or something wrong with your work or that you don't deserve to keep going. It's not a referendum on the quality of your work. It's one editor's opinion on that day. You know? If you get a rejection back 30 times on the same piece, then take it back to your friends and say, could you read this again for me? I think there might be something wrong with it. You know, but until a piece has been rejected, I would say a minimum of 30 times, don't give up on it. For sure. And then you had a second part. I'm terrible at remembering part twos. What was the second part of the question?
Well, sometimes you've written something and
Major revisions on something you love.
yes.
Sleep on it, first of all. Your impulse will be to write an email immediately back to that editor, explaining to them why they are wrong and the work is untouchable genius as it is. And that's the wrong move. So sleep on it. And sleep on it for a couple of nights, you know, and think, okay, what about this critique has the potential to make this section stronger? Is there anything here that I want to listen to? Does this editor's vision for my work correspond to and resonate with my own vision for my work, or are they trying to take it in a different direction, right? Because they might have a different aesthetic, they might have different ideological commitments. They might see something in your work and think, ooh, it could become this other thing. And that's not what you want it to be. So there will be times when you hold fast. And you'll be like, no, these don't resonate with my own vision. Are you still willing to take it? And then there will be other times where you're like, yeah, this is painful. I don't like this. But if I sit with it for a while, I do see how this critique can strengthen my work and make it even better. So it's really, your call. And if you have a couple of trusted readers, you run that past them and see what they think. And don't just have this be like your best friends, because they'll all be like, man, screw that editor, whatever, right? Don't rely on those friends. Rely on the friends with really good literary judgment that you trust. That would be my suggestion. I've certainly had suggestions for revision that didn't sit well with me initially. And then when I thought about it, this editor's, in this case, this editor's just trying to make it a better experience for the reader. And maybe I'm not divulging enough, or maybe I'm not doing it in a way that's exciting, whatever. And I've found a way to make it work. But there have been a couple of times that I've been like, you're not getting it. And then we have a talk. It's good to work with it. Like by the time you're starting to publish books, it's really good to work with an editor who gets you and whom you trust, with the vision of your book. That makes a big difference. With journals, it's a little harder. You have to build up a relationship with a journal editor over multiple pieces. With a book editor, it's really important to have a very good conversation at the beginning so that you know you're simpatico. I want to share one more thing about the book, but I don't want to cut off any questions. And it looks like we're getting close to time. Is there another question?
The title, Flight Risk, could have multiple meanings. Was that your original title? Were you working with lots of titles, or is it this is it?
Yeah, it was my third title, but I really do love this title. And it was my idea. It wasn't something that the editor imposed because of a marketing team decision, which sometimes happens. The first title was The Strain, as if Isabel might have inherited a strain from her own mother that made her scared of herself, and it was a strain on her mentally and so on. So I like titles that work in multiple dimensions, as you say. But apparently there had been a TV show called The Strain, and so we couldn't go with that. And then the second one was another title, and there had been some kind of book recently with that title. So editors always have to be alert. They don't want, which is weird because Hell or High Water, then there was a film called Hell or High Water, which was unfortunately not based on my book. But you kind of try to avoid things that have been too much trafficked. But yeah, flight risk, I really love that. We're always talking on campus about our star faculty members being big flight risks because other institutions are trying to poach them. And so that's a term that I'm always hearing and thinking about. What would it be like for someone to be a flight risk in their own personal life? And what might make a person be so? And what would they do with that? Would they carry everything in their backpack? Or would they try to settle down? And how would they negotiate those questions? So, yeah. Is there a question in the back of the room?
One more quick one.
Yeah, sure.
So what do you write? Teaching, other things, what do you write?
Anytime I'm not teaching or doing those other things. Yeah, I don't have a proper schedule. And I love this about other writers too, when they're like, I wake up at 4:30 every morning, right in my rocking chair, overlooking the bird feeder with my cup of green tea. I love this, and then they meditate and they're just basically perfect. And I'm the opposite. I'm the opposite. I write in the in-between moments anytime I can. I genuinely love it. Like for me, it's a pleasure and an escape. Like the way you might play a game on your phone, standing in line at the grocery store, it's like a little escape. And for me, writing is like that. So I squeeze it in everywhere. And then when I have big chunks of time, like during the summers, which are the blessing, of an academic career, or on the weekends, or at holidays. So families don't always love this, but I write as much as I can, but I don't have the proper schedule. Yeah, I've always felt like I don't need one. I'm productive, I'm pretty productive. So if I ever felt like my productivity was lower than I wanted it to be, I might get more strict with myself, but it just seems to happen organically, and so I trust that process. I don't want to go overtime. Can I tell everybody? Yeah. So part of the impulse for this particular book, Flight Risk, stems from my own autobiography. When I was a kid, and this is covered in my memoir, The Truth Book. When I was a kid, we lived in an extremely violent environment for about 2 years. My mother was married to someone who eventually did go to prison. And when I was 14, I ran away from home, but I couldn't convince my little brother to come with me. We were raised as Jehovah's Witnesses, and we were pretty, from birth, so we were pretty firmly indoctrinated and did believe everything. And we were told that to leave family was to turn our backs on God. Right? And the violence had gotten so severe and extreme that as a 14-year-old, I was like, yeah, okay, if this is what God's like, then forget about it. And I did run away. Although interestingly, I did not read the religion for a whole nother year. It was in quite deep. But my brother was too scared to come with me. And so for 6 months, he was left behind in an extremely bad environment. And I worried every day that we would get the news that he was dead, and that I wouldn't have been able to protect him or save him. And so that is the emotional truth that lies at the center of the character Isabel. She's worried about a family member very badly. And I think because I spent those 6 months as a young teenager in a state of terror, really, and with an incredibly vivid imagination, like most readers and writers have, I imagined every possible scenario under the sun, and was just terrified all the time. And finally, with the courts and the police, we were able to get my brother out. And he's okay. He's okay. But that was a really scary time. And that was, even though I had written about it in my memoir, I thought there's still a lot of energy around this for me. I never really talked in the memoir at all about how terrified I was that we would find out that he had been killed. And so I thought, oh, I'm going to write a novel that explores that's like leftover psychic energy that I carry around for decades, that intense kind of fear. And I think with so many family separations, whether that happens at the border because of politics or in private lives because of, fierce custody battles and whatnot, I think that many people live with a kind of agony. I mean, 3 million children a year in this country are abused, and that's what gets reported. So the violence in the home is ongoing, and it's all around us, and it's pretty easy to conceal. Or at least it's pretty easy to not have anyone intervene. And that was definitely the case with us. And so I wanted to write about that in a way that wouldn't be didactic or, preachy, but just these kinds of violence occur, and they stem from systemic cultural factors, and we can prevent them. So that was part of what impelled me to write this novel. The end. Thank you.
What city in West Virginia did you grow up in? What city?
So the question was, what city in West Virginia did I grow up in? Bridgeport, Lumberport, Buchanan, and Fairmont. Yeah.
Joy, I have a little gift for you from the
this is so
Heritage Room
cool.
of
Thank
Nebraska
you.
authors. So thank you.
Oh,
for
this is beautiful. I love it. Thank you. I will drink my coffee out of this tomorrow morning.
That's great.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. All right, so I'm happy to sign any books that you would like.
For sure. I want to thank
I'm just going to thank the Nebraska Literary Heritage Association and the Lunch at the Library Committee who put on this event. So what really interesting to talk today, Joy. So thank you very much. And I'm Diane, the curator of the Heritage Room, and I'll be going back down to the 3rd floor to the Heritage Room if anybody would like to come see the collection or visit the room. Thank you.